So welcome, Konrad.
Thanks, Shelley. That's great, and thank you very much also, Jan. Yes, it is Happy November, the final evening of it. So for those who do know me, this isn't my usual look. This isn't my usual location either. I'm coming to you from Cairns tonight. We've had a forum up here for Cape York Primary Health, so it's a bit of a different location, but it's lovely to be up here and it's lovely to be with you guys this evening. So tonight we're talking about an area in which general practitioners often actually struggle a bit, which is how do we actually effectively give feedback to our GP registrars, and we acknowledge that there's no single answer that covers everything, but hopefully we're going to be able to in tonight's session go through a variety of situations where you'd realise that actually could have done with some effective feedback at that stage. Have a few different varieties, a few different strategies available for you that you could easily apply to almost any learner or situation where it's indicated. Be able to determine which of those might be the most appropriate in a certain setting or how you want to develop those. And then also be mindful and understand the importance difference between feedback and assessment there as well. So just on a bit of background, I'm a GP supervisor based at Proserpine in North Queensland. I'd previously been a medical educator with medical training up until a couple of years ago, talking about supervisor education predominantly. So we've had a few runs of this, but we've also recognised that all across Australia, the different regional training organisations have got some degree of teaching about how to provide feedback in their supervisor education. So I acknowledge that what we're going through tonight is not by any means a comprehensive tutorial. It's to be used certainly in conjunction with the local protocols and advice that you may have in a certain regional training organisation. So we certainly acknowledge that that being able to give effective and constructive feedback really is one of those core skills that general practice supervisors need to have. We also need to be able to accept constructive feedback as well. We know that quite often registrars will perceive that that the feedback they're getting is often only of a negative variety. Of course, there are some times when they're only getting praise and only getting positive feedback as well. So we're going to need to look at how we better find that balance this evening too. When you're actually going through both the RSEGP and the ACRM training standards, the regular provision of feedback is certainly a requirement that both of them ask of supervisors. So, if you have a registrar who is at the end of their term saying, look, I never actually received any feedback during my training post, we actually are falling short of the standards that are required for us. But why we do it is it's not because we're using feedback as a punitive measure or because it's something which we have to do. We use feedback because we want to actually help our registrars become better GPs. We want to see them grow clinically. We want to see them mature professionally. We also want to see them develop personally as well. And it's only through being able to build on strengths or to counter your weaknesses that registrars or any of us are really going to be able to do that. So it's not something which all of us are particularly comfortable in doing. Why do we struggle with it? There are a variety of reasons. Sometimes it'll be because we might not ourselves feel comfortable with confrontation. It might be because we actually don't have enough confidence in the direct observation of the registrar that we don't feel as though we're in a position to be able to make a significant judgment or a significant comment on their activity or their action. We would certainly have occasions where we find that if we're actually criticising or offering negative feedback to our registrar, we're wondering, are we actually perfect ourselves? Are we in a position to be throwing stones? And it makes us reflect on our own behaviour and our own performance at that stage. But of course, one of the main reasons why we struggle to actually give feedback is we just don't know how. It's not something which you just magically become good at as soon as you become a supervisor or a GP. And it's only by taking the opportunities of having proper teaching opportunities like these that you can actually that make some sense out of it. And of course, at the end of the day, you know, we come into medicine because we're altruistic people, where we're inherently positive. We like to see the best in other people, and you know, sometimes we're just really polite, and we've been raised that, you know, if you don't have something nice to say, then maybe you should keep your mouth shut. But really, that's a detriment to your registrar. It's a detriment to yourself as supervisor. But most importantly, it's for the benefit of our patients that we want to actually see our registrars improve. So we need to make sure that it's for their benefit that we're actually, you know, doing this. So what happens if we don't know how to give feedback properly is that we may end up in the unicorn situation where we're constantly giving praise. We're avoiding the registrar being exposed to difficult patient presentations or to complicated care. We might only be choosing topics for teaching sessions in which our registrars feel comfortable and confident, and they're not really being challenged at all. We might be finding that actually, you know, we aren't seeing enough of what happens with our registrars in their daily encounters, in their daily behaviour, that we're always just saying, okay, well, you know, no news is good news, and silence is golden. So you know, we can often end up in a situation where our registrar thinks, okay, well, I haven't heard anything to the contrary, everything must be fine and dandy. And of course, that's not really a realistic situation. You know, general practice isn't a fantasy. General practice, it can be harsh. General practice is a tough vocation and a tough field. We're dealing with undifferentiated care. Any patient could be presenting to us at any time with anything across the entire spectrum of disease and disorders, and we have to have some degree of resilience to be able to cope with those challenges and those adversities. So, you know, it is really a folly for us to go into the situation where a registrar always thinks that everything is glowing and everything is perfect and that everything is wonderful, because that's not really representative of what happens in modern Australian general practice. Of course, the other scenario that we really need to make sure that we avoid is that we actually can come across as always being negative, that we're always criticising our registrar, we're deliberately choosing topics which are, you know, maybe beyond what they've studied or what they've taught. We're, you know, becoming the real worry is that we're no longer providing adequate support to them. They may feel as though we're undermining their developments, that we might be openly critical of the registrar, sometimes in front of staff, but sadly sometimes in front of patients as well. And that really can turn the registrar's training experience into a nightmare. And of course, that's not a situation which really is fitting for general practice either. You know, this is a challenging vocation. It's a difficult job, but it's still a fantastic source of satisfaction for us. And we really hope that in being effective supervisors, we're imparting that same level of curiosity and satisfaction in the registrars as we find in it ourselves. So when we're talking about what is involved in giving good feedback, there are certainly some key points which just come up time after time after time. And all of the modalities that we look at really revolve around these 5 sort of key aspects. We would want the feedback that is perceived as being of good quality to be timely, in that is given soon after the actual encounter, which is being discussed. So not coming up 6 weeks later, not coming up at the end of the term, not being thrown back at the registrar when they are preparing for their exam or something. You really want to make sure that they're getting the feedback when it's contemporary and when they can actually recall the event, be able to engage in meaningful discussion about it. Good feedback also should be not about the person. It's going to be about the event. It might be about the behaviour, but it's not about personality. We're not there, judging our registrars. But we're there trying to interpret a situation, interpret an encounter. It might be that we fall back to those same generic areas of knowledge, skills, and attributes, and really try and say, okay, well, what actually is it about this particular situation that I think that we need to actually build on or use as a feedback opportunity. So it is important to try to keep things objective wherever we can, and make sure that it's not a personal criticism, or that it's not directed directly at the registrar's personality. Good feedback also should provide direction. It's one thing to point out to a registrar what they may have done wrong, or where you could see that a deficit occurred, but you really need to be then able to actually build them, or give them at least an idea about where they need to build on that, and where they could improve for the future. So we would like to see that rather than just vague comments about, oh, you did really badly at that, or wow, that was great how you handled that consultation. We really want to see that you can actually give the registrar a direction for where they're going to improve beforehand. Because sure, they're adult learners. We're not talking about high school students or undergraduate students. We're talking about mature learners who really are taking responsibility for their own development and their own learning. And every situation in which we have an encounter in general practice is unique to some degree. So there's every likelihood that if they don't learn from this particular encounter or this particular episode, which you're talking about, that same circumstance may not arise again. And so it's important to make sure that they're well poised to be able to take direction from this event. In the same way, good feedback needs to be specific. It's not about, I just don't think you're a good communicator, or maybe you're not suited to general practice, or that, wow, I love the way that you choose the right drugs all the time. We want to make sure that it's actually talking about a direct event. And once again, this is where it comes back to feedback being timely, that specific feedback really needs to be relatable to that particular set of circumstances, that particular event, so that the registrar can correlate in their memory and in their mind what actually was going on at that time, what are the different aspects of it, so they can actually build on where the deficits might have been or where the strengths were that we were talking about. And in that same way, we're going to try to make sure tonight that we teach you how to give balanced feedback. We've already mentioned how that there's no point in our feedback all being positive or all being negative, but it's also at a macro, that's at a macro level, but at a micro encounter, when you actually talk about each individual feedback setting, that we want to make sure that it's balanced in those areas there as well. So as I mentioned before, we do just need to glance over what is the difference between feedback and assessment. So looking at the different types of domains we're talking about, feedback, as I've already mentioned, should be timely. It should be very soon after the event when we're talking about the timing of giving feedback. Of course, an assessment might be end of term, mid-term, end of their training. There are going to be set times when assessment is going to be appropriate. So whereas feedback could be happening all the time. The setting for feedback is generally going to be relatively informal. It might take anything from during a consultation, during a corridor discussion, over lunch, or during one of your teaching sessions. Whereas the assessment really needs to be a little bit more structured and formalised in how that is actually done. When we're giving feedback, we're using, hopefully, as the basis, observation, actually having seen in our registrar their behaviour, their performance. So we're actually knowing from our own personal experience with them and our own personal observations what we're basing the feedback upon. Whereas in assessment, often you may recall that the registrars will actually be asked to complete their own self-evaluation beforehand, and then ask for your correlation on how that sits. So feedback is usually going to be based on the observation, whereas the assessment will be a little bit more in reflection as well, because we're talking about a longer period of time. Feedback, as I've already mentioned, needs to be specific in its scope. It needs to be sort of relating to a particular event or a particular circumstance or performance. Whereas the assessment is going to fail if it's trying to look at each individual circumstance as it goes. So we need to make sure that when we're talking about giving assessment, that it's more of a global that we're talking about. And of course, why do we actually use these tools? Well, feedback is to try to help improve the performance of our registrar, whereas assessment obviously is something which is used either within the regional training organisation or by the actual colleges to demonstrate competency and satisfactory progress through the training program. So just some important points there. Does anybody actually find they struggle with differentiating between those? Just pop a comment in the chat box at any time if you've got a comment. So, we've talked a little bit about why do we actually give feedback, and what are the different contexts that come in with that. So, as I've already mentioned, we want to be able to not only maybe build on or address negative behaviours, but also to promote positive behaviour as well. We want the registrar to feel motivated that, okay, well, I can see where I can improve, so they want to actually go ahead and learn something. We want sometimes for our registrars to feel as though they're more empowered, or that they've got greater self-responsibility that they can take as through the feedback process. Of course, we wanted to see change to develop, maybe for building on positives and see something come up there. And of course, feedback can also be used to enhance communication or teamwork within your practice team there as well. The different ways that we might be giving or basing our feedback, as I've already mentioned, that we would hope that it could be based on observation, and that might be happening during the consultation. It might be happening during a teaching session or at some midterm or some periodic reflection of what's been happening. It might be when the registrar actually certainly has a concern themselves about what's going on with their performance, or they're actually concerns which might have been raised from others in the practice team as well. So it's important to be able to build all of these areas into what we're talking about when we're talking about giving feedback. So how do we do it? Well, going through all of the different tools which all of the RTOs use, it's quite obvious that there are a variety of formats which are commonly used. And I'm not here tonight to say to you that there's one single perfect model or there's one single solution which covers all of the different eventualities there. And that's what we're going to try to use tonight is a variety of different tools and different techniques, usually which you're going to find that you'll need to actually then adapt a little bit yourself, comparing on what's going on in the individual circumstances of your registrar and your training post. Some of the tools which we're going to use tonight are really very simple, and you'll be able to master them and take them on straight away. Some of them are going to be complex. All of them have been validated. They've all been around for some period of time, and they've now come into common usage. And of course, you're going to find that as your registrar develops, as they go from their GPT1 stage through to when you're talking about exam preparation, you're going to be able to use different ways of these techniques that might be appropriate to them as their skill level. And of course, it's not going to just be the registrar's experience and the registrar's skill which develops and changes the way that you provide feedback. It's going to be your own development as a supervisor that changes with that as well. So we're all well aware that there's no single correct way to resect an ingrown toenail, that we've all got ways which we might have been taught or that we've seen others do it. And we've all adapted our own styles, and we might have our own different ways. And there's no reason why we can't think about providing feedback as just another one of those behaviours, those skills that we have. And of course, when we're actually demonstrating that we're using feedback or that we're confident in delivering feedback ourselves, that's how we actually show our registrar that this is a natural part of what we do as clinicians and teachers. And it's always that fundamental need to actually model good behaviour yourself that our registrar needs to see in us, so that they're actually taking it on board themselves. So a few of the basic preparation principles involved. Please always make sure that if you're looking to be giving feedback to your registrar, make sure that there's actually some time that's been put aside for it. And you know, let the staff know, please don't put calls through to me for the next 15 or 20 minutes. Make sure that the registrar is not distracted either, that they're not coming in the middle of a consultation or they've got something else waiting for them. It's always a good idea to let the registrar know, okay, why are we doing this? What actually is feedback about? Why am I talking to you about this today? So they understand what the purpose of it. It's not about punishment. It's not a punitive issue. This is something which we're doing for their benefit. It's important to let the registrar know what actually is it that we're hoping to achieve in this, and what are the goals that we're hoping to obtain, so that you really can not only let the registrar know what actually is the purpose of this session, but also afterwards you can say, did we meet that? Did we actually reach those goals? Have we actually improved your understanding of what's going on? It's very important in giving feedback that you really are being able to base what you're talking about on actual information and actual facts. And of course, the best way that you're going to be able to do that is if you've been observing the registrar yourself. So direct observation, even if that's through video recording or having sat in yourself, is certainly much better. Please never speculate or you go based on hearsay or third-party opinions if they're not substantiated, because really that puts you in a very difficult position if the registrar is unsure about their own recollection of events, or if they're challenging that recollection of events. And of course, by using sessions like this evening, we hope that you find that you're actually able to better have your skills that you're confident in giving feedback there too. So the first of the models which we're going to dwell on is one which I think you've probably all come across to some degree. Pendleton's rules has been around for well over 30 years now. It's a model which is really well suited to general practice. And although we're talking about it tonight in more of a one-on-one format, it's very, very good in small group learning as well. So as we said, we always start off with just clarifying matters of fact. What actually is it that was seen? What are the facts that we know, and make sure that you give the registrar the opportunity to actually confirm that, yeah, okay, that's what I see, that's what I understand, or I recollect from that as well. Always good to ask, okay, well, what do you think went well in that, and give the registrar the opportunity to address those points first. And say, okay, well, what went less well? What are the things that we think aren't ideal in that setting or in that situation? And once again, let the registrar come up with that part of it first. And you'll be amazed how many times the registrar actually has the maturity and the insight to actually come up with all of the issues there themselves. You may have been dreading providing this feedback, but your registrar actually realises, particularly if they're going back looking through a video recording, or they're going back through their own notes of the consultation, where their actual own deficits were there. But then, of course, your role as a supervisor is that we would like you then to be able to come in with some suggestions afterwards. And okay, well, what might be the things that you think might be able to be done differently if we were to have this circumstance or this scenario rise again? So that's where we want to see some constructive suggestions to move forward onto. And of course, Maggie, that observation isn't just about seeing the registrar with the patient there in front of them. Isn't just about seeing the registrar with the patient there in front of them. Observation also is. We've already spoken in earlier sessions this year about random case analysis or case review, and being able to actually do things like an audit of their pathology, going through their notes and referral letters are fantastic ways of building that information, that direct facts and evidence of the registrar that we need to talk about. So certainly, Maggie, thanks for raising that point. Another model, which is the modified Calgary-Cambridge model, is the set-go one. This is another model which works well in small groups, but I'd certainly find that this works well in one-on-one. This is a fantastic model when you are sitting with the registrar reviewing video consultations. So it's the good opportunity where you might open up with what I saw as the supervisor. What were your actual direct observations of the encounter? Then you're also looking onto what might be the other parts which the registrar might not be picking up on as easily. So what might be the hidden insights, and those are often things that you're actually picking up, like the body language of the patient, some jargon that the registrar might have been using, all those sort of little hidden nuances that aren't always immediately obvious to the registrar. Then, of course, give the registrar the opportunity to reflect on that and say, okay, what do they think about that? What's their reflections on the comments that you've raised? Then you actually go into moving forwards. So this is why I guess the hyphen comes in at this stage. So looking at this, looking at what you've seen and what the registrar thinks about that, what might be some goals which you want to actually do better next time with, and that's where it's a very collaborative approach where you and the registrar would hopefully be able to work through together what might be the deficits or the weaknesses there that need to be worked on. And then, of course, the task, and this is where it's actually positive, is that you're working, okay, well, what might be the ways that we can actually negotiate a plan to get to those outcomes or to actually address those goals so that the registrar is better equipped to take this on next time round. So that's a very simple model. I'm sorry that it's another set of acronyms. There's lots of acronyms in anything involved with medical education. But hopefully you'll find, as I said, some of these models might just work well for you and that are particularly memorable and you want to be using going forwards. Another feedback tool which I hadn't used so often until one of our other medical educators used it during all of the ECT visits that she reviews is the coaching feedback format, and now I really love it. So it really just gives you particularly if you're not particularly confident with providing feedback. If you're going in with a structure like this, you'll find that it's much easier to actually observe the registrar during a patient encounter or during a performance of a task. So you want to be able to give the registrar some positive. As I said earlier, we want to make sure that our feedback is balanced. There's some positive, but there's also some constructive stuff going on in there as well. So to say, keep doing. It's good to be able to comment on the aspects of the registrar's performance that were effective. Once again, we want to be able to actually give some specifics there about the things there that were particularly effective. We want them to keep going with. And what might be the things that you really would like to see them actually build on, in that regard. And some of that also comes in to do more. That you want to be able to show the registrar, look, I could see there was glimpses of these things. We'd like to see you build on that and actually use that more often and more frequently. And sometimes, that might be perceived by the registrar as actually just giving them permission. It might be something which they might still at the moment be feeling uncomfortable about using or don't maybe worried about how it comes across. And it's not until they've actually got you sitting there observing them that they say, okay, well, all right, I wasn't sure if that's the way I'm supposed to go or not. I'm thankful for that feedback. Sometimes also you can see that there's something that the registrar really isn't just picking up on, or that maybe there's a real hint that you want them to be able to use. So this is really the try this section is where the registrar is getting your genuine insights, your experience, rather than having to learn the hard way themselves. So you'd really want to be able to give the registrar or the learner just a nice point of growth. Maybe just stretch their skills, stretch what they've been doing a little bit, just to try to help them expand their capacity and be better prepared for if they were to come across this same encounter in the future. And of course, it's very important to be able to find, okay, well, where are the things where you were just biting your tongue or really just having to sit on your hands and say, no, please don't do that. Stop doing. So once again, this is important to be able to give this feedback in a timely fashion, be able to come back to the registrar while they can still remember, oh yeah, I do that, don't they? So if you can actually really point out what were the things that really weren't helpful in that encounter or could actually be harmful. And so this is once again where just like we want to be able to show what's the specifics of the positives that we want to enhance and encourage, what are the specifics about those negatives that we really want the registrar to be aware of so they can address them and get on to those honestly. Another wonderful tool, which is great for particularly for junior registrars or for registrars who are having to have informal teaching during consultations, is the 1-minute preceptor model, which some of you may be familiar with. But I love it for impromptu when you've actually got something which is happening, because we're all doing part of this all the time, and hopefully many of you are familiar with this already. And what this feedback model requires is you actually get the registrar to give a commitment about what is going on. So often you'll actually have the registrar coming in asking for your advice or asking you to come and look at something with them. This is where you actually say, okay, well, what do you think is happening? So get the provisional diagnosis or that really précis of what the registrar has come into, rather than just the request for your help. Then you ask them for why have you come to that opinion? What actually is the supporting evidence that you've got for that? And that's where you can actually see that there might be an opportunity to say, well, actually there's some general rules here, there's some other stuff here which the registrar might not have been aware about, and we've actually got the opportunity to teach there. It is once again important to be able to give them something positive about it and say, okay, well, here are the things where you actually were showing that you were on the right track and that you were doing well with that part. But then also, what might be the things that we want to be able to correct, or what might be the mistakes that were made there that we're hoping that are going to be able to be addressed before that particular sets again. One of the slightly more complicated feedback tasks is agenda-led outcome-based analysis. And this also, I think, sort of comes back to the Calgary method, I think, a little bit. But this is certainly something where you want to let the registrar set the scene themselves. So, you know, what actually is the things that they're concerned about. And so we've already talked earlier about maybe where the registrar might not be able to see their own deficits, or might really need your input with that. But this is certainly a great tool for when you've got a more mature registrar or somebody who might be preparing for exams or awaiting fellowship. That, you know, you want them to be able to actually say, all right, well, what are the outcomes that they're wanting to reach for this? So it's very important to let the registrar say what they want to achieve. Let them come up with the solutions first. Then you, as the supervisor, or if you're doing this in a small group, you might have the group of you actually coming through with your comments and your feedback. And once again, this is great when you've actually got direct observation of what has actually happened in the encounter that's being talked about. This is where you're really wanting to make sure that, you know, you're not just reciting comments. You're wanting to actually respect the maturity of your registrar and give them constructive suggestions, rather than just you know, reciting back to them what they were doing. Then once you've actually said, okay, well, now that we've talked about what might be the actual real valid ways that you could change that, maybe it's sometimes worth actually role playing that. And in the privacy of a one-on-one one-on-one teaching session, it's really easy to be able to get the registrar. Maybe just say, all right, well, let's say if you're in that patient consultation again, how might you actually do it differently? So it's then great for you then as the supervisor to just flick back over that and say, all right, here we go, let's try it again. So now we're going to actually go through some of these models and say, how might we actually be able to actually put those into place in our day-to-day teaching? So we're just going to go through some scenarios that we might be coming across. Let's do the first one. In reviewing the patient feedback surveys collected at your surgery, you notice that many patients have been particularly impressed with the thorough nature of your GP registrar's consultations. You have, however, also noticed her becoming stressed about how often she is running late with her appointments. She also says that she feels that she is spending too much time with her patients. I'm just wondering if there might be anybody who might be happy to put a comment in about what might be an appropriate feedback model here, or how would you approach this opportunity for feedback? So just going to give you a minute just to put in some thoughts or yeah, Chris, direct observation would be a great one to be able to use it. But direct observation is really just the tool for gathering the information. Direct observation isn't the actual feedback mechanism itself. Which of the feedback models might be something that you could use in that direct observation to build on that for the registrar? Any other thoughts or comments from anybody else here at all? All right. Well, certainly, I might say that that this is a great opportunity for that coaching feedback grid that we were just mentioning. So if you actually are sitting in with the registrar and you're looking at, okay, well, this is the concerns that the registrar might have, then I would say that it's a great opportunity to maybe look at the keep doing and say, look, I really like the way that you're very patient-centered in your consultation style, and you've got a fantastic safety netting structure that you're using with all of the patients that are coming through. I'd really like to see you doing some more of not letting the patients completely get through all of the list when it's going to stifle your day, but encouraging the patients to rebook another consultation if there are some less urgent issues that were coming up. You might say that I did notice, however, that that you might get some extra confidence, or you might find your consultations run a bit smoother if you might perhaps use a few more focused questions rather than all open-ended questions. And you might find that's a great way to save time. But I also noticed during that direct observation session that you're getting into a habit of racing between consultations and not actually doing your notes until the end of the session. That's certainly a habit that we might want you to get out of. So you can see how just with some simple observations, if you aren't particularly confident yourself with giving feedback during direct observation, then using something like that feedback grid really gives you an easy way to be able to actually come up with something there. Another scenario we might come across. While you're assisting your registrar looking at a pigmented lesion during a consultation, you notice although he's got a great way of excluding melanoma, and you've got no concerns about his safety in that fashion, you are actually noticing that he's struggling to assess non-melanoma skin cancers. Wondering how might others approach this opportunity for feedback? What might be a way that somebody else might do that? Or what might be the feedback model that you might use in this setting? Have you got any comments for the chat box there on that one? Well, I would certainly think that that this might be a great position to use the 1-minute preceptor. The 1-minute preceptor comes in really well during patient consultations for a number of reasons, but it's great to be able to say to your registrar, look, I know that you've asked me to come in and have a look at something because you're not sure, but I would like you to actually commit to the diagnosis. And even if that is as simple as they're saying, well, look, I think it's a non-melanotic skin cancer, this isn't necessarily about which particular type of BCC or something. We just want them to actually say what they think that it is, rather than just saying, I want you to come and look at something. Because once they've actually made that commitment, you can then actually say, well, what are the things that are fitting with that? What's the supporting evidence? So your registrar might then actually have to verbalise the thought pattern of saying, well, look, there's no real pigment irregularity going on there. It doesn't really, or it does actually have a very defined border. So I'm confident to say that it's not melanoma. Then, if you're actually seeing that in providing that supporting evidence, your registrar really was missing some of those general rules that we might talk about, then you might be able to come in with something like, yeah, but you actually notice how we've got an irregular telangiectasia network that's developing here, or that it might be that actually this, you're seeing that there's a fine border, but there's actually quite a lot of squamous dysplasia going on over the top here as well. So really is that opportunity to give those general rules to the registrar, because they're focused, they're listening at that point in time in what's going on. It is great to be able to give the positives and to actually say that, yes, thank you for asking me to have a look at this. But then what you want to do is say, right, now that we've actually got those general rules, now that you're actually a little bit more confident about what actually are the things that you might not have been sure about with this particular lesion, do you think maybe you want to go back and have a look at a few of the other spots that you might have already perused over and maybe apply those rules to some other lesions you might have been thinking about? And a great part about this, when you use a technique like the 1-minute preceptor during a patient consultation, obviously this actually then gives the opportunity not only to enhance the experience of the registrar, but you can also still intervene in the outcome for the patient rather than having to worry about call them back or or fix up a problem later on. So it's a great tool to be able to use during the actual consultation. Of course, there's going to be some times when we haven't actually seen what is going on, what is the actual feedback event that we're needing to talk about. And it might be that at the conclusion of a busy morning session, your practice manager asks for a quiet word about your registrar. The reception staff have been reporting to her to the practice manager that several patients have been unhappy with their consultations with the registrar, describing him as rude and abrupt. You haven't seen any evidence of this in your own interactions with him, but certainly agree with the practice manager's request that you need to address this with him. I'm wondering if there's anybody in the audience this evening who might have their thoughts about how they'd approach this feedback requirement, or what might be a type of model that they might use in this themselves. Well, I would wonder if maybe this is something where you can fall back on a simple model like Pendleton's rules and actually come back with those simple parts of structures. Yeah, thanks, Leslie, for cancelling that with me. It's a good validation for it. So we want to start off with clarifying the matters of fact. So, let the registrar know, all right, what were the concerns that have been presented to the registrar? Then really give the registrar the opportunity to say, is that your recollection? Do you agree with these facts? Make sure that we're actually giving the registrar the opportunity to not feel as though this is an ambush, and certainly make sure that you let them go back through their notes. You're not expecting them to be able to recall the whole lot. So whatever tools they might have to be able to help clarify the facts is important there as well. Then very important, as we mentioned earlier, to say, okay, well, what actually went well? So, when now on reflecting on one of these events, what did the registrar feel was maybe just routine about that consultation? Are there areas where they thought that they actually were performing quite well and felt comfortably? And that might even be something hidden that isn't obvious to you, or isn't obvious to the registrar. Well, actually, you were running on time, or there's something with that. So the positives aren't always going to be obvious to the registrar. Sometimes the positives, particularly if it's a glaringly negative setting, you might sometimes really have to hunt a little bit harder to find those positives for that particular encounter. Of course, then we are needing to address also, all right, well, what were the things that went less well? And as I said earlier, it's important with Pendleton's rules, give the registrar the opportunity to address these themselves first. So let the registrar come up with what might be the things that didn't go so well. And that might be that now on reflection we can say, oh yeah, actually there were some unmet needs that the patient had that didn't really come across so effectively in the comments to the reception, or that maybe in the actual notes that you've prepared. Or once again, this might be something which is not obvious at the time, that the registrar now on reflecting back says, you know what, the kids had been up all night and I was really tired on the day, or that there might have been something else hidden in the background. They might have been running late or whatever. But you will be surprised how many times when you give the registrar the opportunity to come up with these issues first, that they actually can address those significant points before you come in and add yours. And then, of course, what we want to do is finish on something which is constructive. So you really want to then come in with, okay, well, what are the things that we might do differently in the future? So it might be that, it's obviously important that your registrar be able to clear their mind or really, move on with a clear space onto the next consultation. It might be that the registrar isn't really checking that the patient has understood everything which has been discussed, or that they might not feel as though they've actually been comprehended before the consultation ends. And so, on reflecting through those first areas of what went well and what went less well, you'll be surprised how many times that the registrar is actually able to come up with what might be the things that they would want to change themselves if that same situation arose again in the future. Sometimes, of course, we want to use feedback to be able to help enhance the behaviour of our registrar and really build some self-confidence there for them. So we might have a setting where we're looking, we're well into the first term with a registrar, that 10 weeks in, you're noticing that your GP registrar is still needing to approach you for most paediatric presentations. You certainly haven't had any concerns about her knowledge or her clinical reasoning, but would like to see her confidence increase before she moves on from your training post at the end of the training term. So sometimes, feedback isn't just about addressing a negative situation. We're wanting to maybe enhance some traits there as well. So what might be some ways that some might address this feedback opportunity, or what might be a feedback model that might suit you well for this? Does anybody want to put in a comment there, or their experiences with these types of experiences? All right. Well, this is certainly one where I think something like the set go model might be actually able to be easily adapted to this type of setting. So this is where it's great, as I mentioned, with the set go, if you've actually got some video of consultations, or obviously if you've actually sat in and got some direct observation going on there as well. So what you come up with for the registrar is that what we're going to do is that for the next 5 paediatric presentations, regardless of their complexity, we're going to actually observe those properly. So we're going to get some video recording of what is going on. And then when you actually sit down during your proper teaching session with the registrar and review those consultation recordings, then you might actually be able to see that the registrar obviously has very strong history-taking skills, and she's fantastic with excluding serious illnesses in what's going on with the child. It's also obviously very obvious to the registrar and yourself at that time that she's very thorough and has got fantastic rapport with the patients and is very confident and efficient with how she goes about examining a child during those consultations. However, it might not be quite so obvious to the registrar. It might actually be something which you add with your experience and your perspective as the supervisor. That you're actually your experience and your perspective as the supervisor. That you're actually noticing that she's having some difficulty assuring patients that there's nothing seriously wrong. And you might also be noticing that she's actually got a bit of a tendency towards over-investigation for the patients during that time. When you then ask your registrar, okay, well, what are her thoughts about those observations and those comments? She might then say, well, actually, now that she thinks about it, sometimes she does find it difficult to address the concerns of parents, and sometimes actually feels herself that because she doesn't have children herself, that she gets a little bit intimidated by parents who are seeming very, very worried themselves. And so then it's easy for you, or it's much easier for you and the registrar to actually come up with, all right, what might be some goals that we want to achieve? And she might say, well, I'd really wish that the knowledge that I've got is more authoritative, that I can actually come more assertively reassure the parents that there's nothing wrong, that nothing that really needs investigation or further assessment. And so then you might be able to say, all right, well, here's something which we can do to build on that. And it might be that actually using some patient handouts or some other resources that are obviously from a validated source, but really reinforce that the message that the registrar is giving might actually give her the opportunity to hand over something to the parents, and really that's going to be a great way to build her confidence as well. But of course, you've been able to give her some good direction on something which you want her to be able to improve with there too. So it's certainly great to be able to apply a variety of models to what's actually going on, and to understand what are the different ways that we want to be able to actually provide feedback to the registrars. As we said earlier, though, assessment is something which is a little bit different as well. So hopefully many of you are actually quite well familiar with what goes on with the assessment requirements of each of the colleges, and of course none of them are perfect, and all of this really reinforces how it is our responsibility as supervisors to make sure that it's not until the registrar gets to that college assessment stage that they're then finding out for the first time the areas where they've got deficits in. or that they're falling down on. Because unfortunately, none of the actual assessment tools which we've got is perfect. They've all got strengths and weaknesses. In terms of the applied knowledge test or the multiple choice questions, which are now delivered by both colleges as an online tool, that obviously extends on a wide variety of knowledge base and really assesses a lot of things. It's great because it's standardised. You know that everybody across Australia is doing the same examination at the same time. But of course, that's a very high pressure setting, and there's a wide range of knowledge, and it's very difficult for you as the supervisor to be able to prepare your registrar for all of the things that they need for that assessment. The key feature problems and the OSCE, or the key feature problems particularly, once again, is delivered online as a standardised tool, and that's once again very difficult for you to be able to provide all of the preparation that your registrar needs, move through that well. The OSCE, the clinical examination through the FRA CGP, is certainly something which many of us as supervisors are also examiners for. So we might actually feel as though we're quite confident in what are the standards which are required for that. But of course, the variability of the cases that the registrar might come across with in that setting makes it difficult for us to be able to provide all of the appropriate feedback that they need. So many of those same areas come up with the ACRIM examinations, and so certainly the stamps or the simulated assessment is something which assesses a variety of areas, but and that's once again a little bit easier for us to help our registrars prepare for, but we won't know what the actual context is or what the actual topic is going to be until they get there on the day. However, the mini CEX form is actually a workplace-based assessment, so that's a great tool because it lets the examiner see the registrar how they're actually doing, but that also depends on the patient on the day. So it's very difficult to standardise the patients that they're going to be seeing. Multi-source feedback, once again, has actually got a bit more of the workplace component to it. But there's a lot of different examiners because everybody from the receptionist to the patients is providing that feedback. So it's not always easy to standardise how that's going to go. And but of course we do have the opportunity during the training terms to be actually able to give some meaningful feedback to the registrar through the assessment tools, which are the ECT visits, which are done periodically through the term, and that certainly gives you an opportunity as a supervisor to discuss with the ECT visitor some areas where you might see some weaknesses or something that you want the ECT visitor to be able to help out with. And of course, the end of the term assessment, when you actually sit down with the registrar and reflect on what they've achieved during that term. So I really am hopeful that tonight we've been able to give you a little bit more familiarity with a few of the different feedback modalities and how you might be able to incorporate those into what you do in your own practice and your own training posts and environments, and how you might be able to build on those. I just want to take a couple of minutes just for any comments or questions or discussion on what we've come up with so far. Okay, all right, well, and what we just need to make sure of is that we need to make sure that feedback isn't something which is dreaded. We want to be able to make sure that we're giving every opportunity to get feedback in regularly, not wait till the end of the term, not wait until it's too late to see some change happen. As we've already said, we do this to help the registrar develop, but we're also doing this to help the whole of the team. We want to be able to make sure that the staff are all feeling as though they're part of the registrar's development and that they're part of what's going on. And of course, while we do everything to enhance, to help provide quality improvement in medicine, is to help the experience of our patients as well. I cannot stress enough times that please make sure you have some modality of getting some direct observation of what's going on with the registrar. And then make sure that, you, and as Stephen has pointed out, that look across the different modalities of feedback there. Find something, even if you have to take different components from each of those different tools that you want to blend into something that you want to use yourself. As long as it works for you and you're confident to use it, go for it. But really, we want to be able to make sure that it's not just left to the summative assessments of the colleges to come up with letting the registrar know where they're at, but really making sure that every day that your registrar is getting some indicator on how they're actually progressing, and that they're actually able to go ahead and to produce that. So it's great to see some comments about people who are wanting to be able to come in and build this into their practice. Thank you very much for your participation and your attention, everybody.